The morning light filtered through the old lace curtains in Mary Thompson's kitchen, casting delicate patterns on the wooden floorboards. It was October in Maine, the kind of crisp, quiet morning when the world seemed suspended between the last warmth of fall and the hush of approaching winter. Mary stood at the counter in her worn flannel robe, pouring hot coffee into the same ceramic mug she'd used for years, cream-colored, with a faded sunflower near the rim. It had a chip on the handle, the kind you'd only notice if you held it every day, like she did. The house was silent except for the slow ticking of the wall clock and the occasional rustle of wind-blown leaves against the windows. Emily hadn't lived there in over a decade, and James, her husband, had been gone 5 years now. Mary had gotten used to the quiet, maybe even found comfort in it. She moved through her morning routine with the grace of someone who had long stopped rushing. Coffee, mail, crossword, feed the cat, open the back door and let the cold air in for just a moment to remind herself she was still alive. But that morning, something was different. She reached up to adjust her sweater, one she had knitted herself the winter James passed, and felt it, a hard, unfamiliar lump under her left breast. She paused. Her fingers hovered there, hesitant. She pressed again. There it was, small, round, and unmistakably foreign. At first, she stood frozen in place, coffee forgotten on the counter. Her heart thudded once, twice, like the low drumbeat of something ancient and terrible. Then the practical part of her, the part that had raised a daughter on a teacher's salary and nursed her mother through cancer without shedding a tear, spoke up. "It's probably nothing," it said. "A cyst. Just a swollen gland." Still, her hand remained on that spot long after she moved to sit at the kitchen table. Her eyes stared past the steam rising from the mug. The crossword lay untouched. Her mind took her back 20 years, to the beige room in the nursing home where her mother, Margaret, had spent her final days. Margaret had been stubborn and proud, never told anyone about the pain in her chest until it was too late. Stage 4. By the time she said the word cancer, it was already written all over her. Mary had never forgiven her mother for hiding it, for dying in silence, for denying them all a chance to say goodbye properly. And yet, here she was, sitting with a secret of her own. She didn't call Emily. Not that day. Her daughter was in Boston, working long hours at the law firm. Mary didn't want to worry her, at least not until she had answers. She told herself it would be irresponsible to bring up a maybe when she didn't even have a diagnosis. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe. Still, she didn't sleep that night. The silence that had once been comforting now pressed in on her like a weight. She lay in bed, tracing the contours of the lump with trembling fingers, counting heartbeats like a metronome for anxiety. The darkness had never felt so loud. By the second morning, the lump was still there. Mary stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual, the soft morning light catching the silver streaks in her hair. She studied herself, not with vanity, but with the searching eyes of someone trying to read their own future. The skin around her eyes was thinner, her mouth a little tighter than she remembered. But it was the uncertainty that weighed most heavily on her face. She touched the lump again. It hadn't moved, it hadn't gone away, and she knew, deep down, that it wouldn't. She dressed slowly that day, layering her cardigan like armor, smoothing her skirt like she used to before a parent-teacher conference. As she stepped outside, a gust of wind sent yellow leaves swirling around her feet. The air smelled like wood smoke and damp earth. She walked across the yard, down the gravel path, and stopped at the gate next door. Agnes answered the door in her robe, holding a steaming mug of chamomile tea, 72 and sharp as a whip. Agnes was one of the few people in the world Mary truly trusted. She was the kind of neighbor who left baked goods by your door without knocking and knew how to give advice without ever sounding like she was giving it. Agnes tilted her head. "Something's wrong," she said, not as a question. Mary smiled faintly. "You always know. I've known you for 30 years, dear. Come in." They sat at the kitchen table, the old radio playing a soft jazz tune in the background. Mary hesitated. Then, in a voice barely louder than the hum of the refrigerator, she said, "I found something." Agnes's smile faded. "Where?" Mary tapped her chest, just above her left breast. Agnes reached across the table and placed her hand over Mary's. "Have you called your doctor?" Mary shook her head. "Not yet." "Why not?" "I don't know," Mary whispered. "Maybe I'm afraid it's real. Maybe I'm afraid it's not." Agnes nodded slowly. "Your mother?" Mary looked down. "Yes. I promised myself I'd never do what she did, but here I am." "You're not your mother," Agnes said gently, "and you don't have to do this alone." For a moment, Mary didn't speak. Her mind drifted, unbidden, to James, his laughter in the kitchen, his warm hand on her back as they danced to old records in the living room. He had been the practical one, the strong one, the one who always knew what to do in a crisis. When he died, a part of her confidence died with him. And yet, she could almost hear his voice now, steady and warm. "You've got this, Mare. Make the call." That afternoon, Mary sat by the phone for nearly half an hour, the handset resting in her lap like a loaded weapon. She picked it up, dialed, hung up, dialed again. Her fingers trembled. Finally she called. The receptionist was kind, efficient. They scheduled her for the following Thursday, a full exam, mammogram, possibly more. When she hung up, Mary felt both relief and dread wash over her. She had taken the first step, but stepping into the unknown didn't feel like bravery. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, hoping the wind wouldn't blow too hard. That night, she wrote in her journal for the first time in months, a single sentence: "I don't know what this is yet, but I'm ready to find out." Then she turned off the light and listened to the silence, waiting for sleep that did not come. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and winter air, sterile, sharp, cold. Mary sat in the waiting room of the Diagnostic Imaging Center, her purse clutched tightly in her lap. She had dressed carefully that morning, as if the right cardigan and lipstick could somehow armor her against whatever was coming. Around her, other women waited too, most of them younger. Some scrolled through phones, others stared at the muted TV bolted to the wall, playing a home renovation show no one was really watching. She hadn't told Emily she was here. She hadn't told anyone except Agnes. It was easier to manage her fear in silence, without having to soothe someone else's. Emily had always been sensitive, the kind of child who cried at sad movies and worried too much. Mary had raised her to be strong, but she knew, no matter how grown her daughter had become, Emily would always be shaken by the idea of losing her mother. A nurse with kind eyes and a clipboard called her name. Inside the exam room, everything was too bright, too white. Mary changed into a hospital gown and sat on the narrow table, the paper beneath her crackling with every shift of movement. The mammogram was quick but uncomfortable. The ultrasound followed. Cool gel spread across her skin, the silent hum of the machine as the technician pressed the wand firmly against her breast. Neither woman spoke. The technician's expression gave nothing away. Mary watched the screen, trying to read the blurry, ghost-like shapes, but they meant nothing to her. After the imaging was done, she waited again, this time in a smaller room. It was quiet, almost peaceful, if not for the ticking of a clock mounted too high on the wall. She stared at the second hand as it ticked forward, and in that stillness, her mind drifted, unwillingly, back to the last few months of her mother's life. She remembered the smell of lavender lotion and antiseptic, the way the sun filtered through the blinds in the nursing home, how her mother had started shrinking into the bedsheets, becoming less of a person and more of a memory before she was even gone. Mary had been angry that her mother had said nothing until the disease had already taken everything. There had been no warning, no discussion, no chance to fight, only the slow, inevitable unraveling. Margaret had left behind a small box of photographs and a note that read, "Don't cry too long, Mary. I did what I thought was best." But what was best about silence? What was best about leaving your only daughter to grieve alone? Mary swore she would never do the same. And yet here she was, in a hospital gown, feeling like she was following her mother's footsteps in spite of herself. A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. A physician's assistant entered, young, friendly, her voice smooth but clipped with professional detachment. She explained that the radiologist had reviewed the images and identified an area of concern. A biopsy would be needed. They could schedule it within the week. Mary nodded. Her voice caught in her throat when she tried to ask a question, so she didn't ask anything at all. She walked out of the hospital on autopilot, clutching a folder of appointment slips and instructions she hadn't yet read. Outside, the wind had picked up. The trees along the sidewalk had shed most of their leaves, their bare branches etched like veins against the gray sky. Mary stood in the parking lot, staring at her car, trying to remember where she had parked it. When she finally climbed into the driver's seat, she didn't start the engine. She just sat there, breathing, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked like someone else, a woman bracing for something unnamed, something vast. She whispered, "It's probably nothing," but even she no longer believed it. The results came on a Tuesday afternoon, in the form of a phone call Mary would never forget, not because of what was said, but because of how quiet the world became afterward. She had just finished folding laundry when the phone rang. The number was familiar, and her stomach clenched before she even answered. "Mrs. Thompson," the doctor said, his voice calm but careful. "The biopsy confirms it's invasive ductal carcinoma. Stage 2 billions?" She didn't respond at first. Her brain clung to the word invasive like it was a stain that wouldn't wash out. She pressed the phone harder to her ear, as if proximity might soften the blow. "We'll need to schedule a consultation to discuss treatment options. Surgery, chemotherapy, possibly radiation. But I want to emphasize that this is treatable. Many women recover from this stage." Mary murmured something that sounded like thank you, though it didn't feel like gratitude. It felt like saying thank you after being told your house had burned down, but, luckily, the garage survived. She hung up and sat back on the edge of her bed, staring at the pile of folded towels in her lap. The room was still. The late afternoon light filtered through the blinds, casting thin, slatted shadows across the floor. A bird chirped once from a tree outside, then fell silent. Her breath came in shallow waves. Her hands were perfectly still, folded over the towel like she was praying. But inside, it felt like the floor beneath her had opened up, and she was falling, quietly, invisibly, into some deep place where there were no handrails, no ropes, no light. She didn't cry. That was the strange part. She had imagined this moment 100 different ways: tears, denial, anger, maybe even a dramatic shattering of plates or a scream into the empty sky. But in reality, she felt blank, hollowed out, like someone had scooped the center out of her and left the shell standing upright. She sat like that for almost an hour, unmoving. The sun had started to dip behind the trees when she finally rose and placed the towels in the hallway linen closet, slowly, as if each movement required conscious effort. In the kitchen, she put on the kettle and made a cup of chamomile tea, though she didn't drink it. She just held the mug in her hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. The silence in the house felt different now, not peaceful, but oppressive. She thought about calling Emily. A dozen times she picked up the phone, only to set it down again. What would she say? "Hi, honey, it's cancer." It felt cruel to make that call. Emily was working, probably in a meeting or drafting something important. What if she was on the subway? What if she cried in public? What if she didn't answer, and Mary had to leave a voicemail with the worst news of their lives? No, not yet. Let me give her one more night, Mary thought. Let me give her one last night of not knowing. She watched the clock inch toward midnight. The kettle had gone cold, the tea untouched. Finally, when the silence became unbearable, she dialed. Emily answered after the second ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Mom?" Mary hesitated. For a moment, all she could hear was her own breathing. "Mom, are you okay?" I'm sorry to call so late," Mary said, her voice breaking around the edges. I didn't want you to hear this in a voicemail." The pause on the other end was long. Then Emily whispered, "Is it bad?" Mary's throat tightened. "It's cancer, breast cancer. Stage 2 billions." The words hung there, suspended between them, like snow falling in slow motion. Emily gasped softly, then said nothing. Mary could hear her daughter's breath, shaky and uneven. "I'm so sorry," Mary added, tears finally escaping, warm and silent down her cheeks. "I didn't know how to tell you." "You don't have to be sorry," Emily said, her voice thick. "I'm getting on the first train home. You don't have to. I want to." They sat in silence, two women separated by miles and grief, connected only by the fragile thread of a phone line. And for the first time in hours, Mary felt something solid beneath her again. Not hope, not yet, but love. And that would be enough, for now. The chemotherapy room was painted in soft colors, sage green walls, pale beige curtains between chairs, but no amount of decor could mask the purpose of the place. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and something sour, like metal and fear. Mary sat in the reclining chair, a thin blanket draped over her lap, and tried to look calm as the nurse inserted the IV needle into the port newly installed in her chest. Emily sat beside her, quiet, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had taken 2 weeks off work to be there, commuting back and forth from Boston on weekends after that. Her presence was both comforting and a little painful. Mary hated the look of worry that lived behind her daughter's eyes now, as if part of Emily had aged 10 years in a week. The nurse explained each step with practiced ease, her voice low and even. "You might feel a metallic taste in your mouth, or a sudden wave of nausea. Let us know right away if anything feels wrong." Mary nodded but said nothing. When the infusion began, it was uneventful at first. Just a slow drip of clear liquid from the IV bag above her, into her veins, through a tube that snaked its way into the port. Nothing burned, nothing itched. It was almost anticlimactic, but halfway through the session, the nausea came like a wave, thick, sour, heavy. Mary pressed the button for assistance and the nurse was quick with anti-nausea meds. Emily held her hand the entire time, her grip steady. "You're doing great," Emily whispered, even as her own voice trembled. Mary closed her eyes. "Don't lie to me." That made Emily laugh, a brief and shaky sound that ended in a sniffle. "Fine. You're doing decent." The first session left Mary drained in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just tiredness. It was a bone-deep, soul-heavy fatigue, like every cell in her body had turned into lead. By the time they got home, she couldn't make it up the stairs. Emily helped her to the couch, brought her ginger tea she couldn't stomach, and sat beside her as night fell. The next morning was worse. Her muscles ached, her mouth tasted like rust, and her appetite was gone. The world felt far away, like she was watching her own life from the wrong side of a window. Even the cat, normally a comforting shadow, seemed reluctant to curl up beside her. By day 3, the reality of chemo settled in like a tenant that wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. There were moments when she forgot, when she managed to sit outside with a blanket and feel the fall breeze on her face, but they were brief. The nausea, the headaches, the exhaustion, they were constant reminders of what her body was fighting and how much of it she was losing. And then, on the 7th day, it happened. Mary stood in the bathroom brushing her hair when she noticed the first strand on the brush, then another, and another. She froze. Her hand trembled as she reached up and ran her fingers through her hair. Several strands came away in her palm. Not clumps, not yet, but more than enough to know this wasn't random. She stared at herself in the mirror, holding the strands like evidence of a crime. Her eyes filled not just with tears, but with something more primal, grief. It was real now, not just a diagnosis, not just paperwork and appointments. It was visible, tangible, undeniable. Her fingers tightened around the hair, and for a moment she felt the urge to scream or sob or collapse. But she didn't. She placed the strands in the trash, straightened her back, and walked out of the bathroom. Emily was in the kitchen, preparing soup from scratch. She turned as Mary entered, smiling hopefully, until she saw the look on her mother's face. "It started," Mary said simply, voice flat. Emily set down the spoon. "Your hair?" Mary nodded. They didn't speak for a moment. Then Emily crossed the room and wrapped her arms around her mother. "It's just hair," she whispered. Mary, who had always believed that phrase was nonsense, finally understood it wasn't. It was a symbol, but it wasn't everything. The next morning, Mary stood in front of the mirror and studied herself carefully. Overnight, more hair had come loose, strands littering her pillow like a quiet betrayal. When she ran her fingers through her scalp, they came away full. This time, it was clumps. Her body, once familiar, had become untrustworthy, unpredictable. She felt like a stranger inside her own skin. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached into the drawer beneath the sink and pulled out an old pair of hair-cutting scissors. James had used them once to trim his beard, back when his hands had still been steady, before the Parkinson's made everything shake. She held the scissors for a long moment, then set them down. "Emily," she called out, her voice steady. Her daughter appeared at the bathroom door almost instantly, her face already concerned. "Are you okay?" Mary turned to face her. "I want to shave it." Emily blinked. "What?" "I want to do it before I don't have a choice," Mary said. "Before it all falls out. I need to be the one who decides." For a long second, Emily didn't respond. Then she gave a small, shaky nod. "Okay, do you want me to help?" Mary hesitated. "Yes, but I want you to film it too." "Film it?" Mary smiled just a little. "I want to remember this, not because I think it'll be beautiful, but because it's mine." They set up the camera in the small guest bedroom with the best light. Mary sat on a stool in front of the window while Emily gathered supplies, clippers, towels, a handheld mirror. The autumn sun cast soft golden light across Mary's shoulders, and for a moment the room felt more like a sanctuary than a battlefield. She picked up the scissors first, just like she'd planned, held them to a chunk of hair and cut. The sound of the blades slicing through was quiet but decisive. She dropped the severed hair into her lap and looked up at the camera. "This is what control looks like," she said, almost to herself. Emily stood beside her, silent, her face pale but resolute. She took over with the clippers once most of the length was gone. Mary closed her eyes as the machine buzzed to life. She felt each pass as vibration and wind, the sound oddly soothing. Strands fell around her shoulders like petals, like something being shed, something that no longer served her. When Emily finished, she handed her mother the mirror. Mary looked. Her scalp was smooth in some places, patchy in others. Her face seemed longer, her eyes larger. The first instinct was to flinch, to look away. But she didn't. She stared at herself, really stared. For the first time in weeks, she looked sick, but she also looked fierce. "I thought I'd be horrified," she said quietly. "But I feel lighter." Emily crouched beside her, tears in her eyes. "You look like a warrior." Mary smiled. "That's because I am." They cleaned up the room together, folding towels, sweeping hair into a small plastic bag. Mary tied the bag gently, then placed it inside a wooden box James had once carved. It was a keepsake now, not of loss, but of decision. Later that night, Mary uploaded a short clip of the moment to her small Facebook account. No captions, no music, just a video of a woman taking back a piece of herself. The response was immediate. Hundreds of messages flooded in from friends, distant acquaintances, even strangers. Stories of survival, of fear, of hope. Some were from women currently in treatment. Others from those who had beaten cancer years ago. A few from men whose wives or mothers hadn't made it. And then there was one private message from a woman named Clara that Mary read over and over. "Thank you. I thought I was the only one who needed to take control. Watching you gave me the courage to schedule my own first appointment. Please don't stop sharing." Mary sat in bed that night, bald, tired, but not broken. She had taken the first step into something unknown and found others already walking beside her. In the darkness, she whispered to no one in particular, "I'm still here." And for the first time in days, she slept without dreams. The fourth round of chemotherapy hit harder than any of the others. Mary had gone in with quiet determination, trying to convince both herself and Emily that this was routine now, just another appointment. She brought a book she knew she wouldn't read, smiled at the nurses, even laughed at a joke Emily tried to make about the awful hospital coffee. But deep down, something felt different this time. Her body was slower to respond, her breath shorter, her bones heavier. 2 days later, Mary collapsed in the bathroom. She had tried to make it to the sink, feeling the nausea mount again in violent waves, but her legs gave out halfway across the tile. The fall wasn't loud, just a dull thud as her hip hit the floor, followed by silence. Emily found her minutes later, sprawled on the cold ceramic tiles, skin clammy and pale, her breath shallow and uneven. "Mom?" Emily's voice cracked. "Mom!" She called 911 with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and rode with her mother in the ambulance, clutching Mary's hand as if her grip alone could keep her tethered to the world. At the hospital, the tests came quickly. IVs, monitors, soft voices, and serious faces. Mary drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only in flashes, the pricking of a needle, the beep of a heart monitor, Emily's tear-streaked face above her. The diagnosis, severe dehydration and a chemo-induced hypotensive episode, a fancy way of saying her body had had enough. The oncologist, Dr. Farrell, a tall man with a gentle demeanor, met with Mary and Emily the next morning. His tone was calm, but his words were heavy. "Mary," he said, folding his hands on his clipboard, "your body is not recovering between rounds. If we continue at this pace, the risks may outweigh the benefits." Mary swallowed. Her throat was raw from vomiting, her voice thin. "So what are you saying?" "I'm recommending we pause treatment. Let your body rest, reassess in a few weeks." Emily nodded quickly, as if relief had just washed over her. But Mary felt something else entirely. Failure. In her mind, pausing meant quitting. It meant the cancer was winning. It meant weakness. She didn't speak again until they were home. That night, long after Emily had gone to bed on the downstairs couch, Mary sat alone in her room with a notebook in her lap. The same notebook she'd started journaling in since the diagnosis. This time, she didn't write an update. She didn't summarize symptoms or track side effects. She wrote a letter. "To my darling Emily," she began. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't keep going, and I'm sorry. Not for the cancer. That part was never mine to choose, but for the silence, for not being able to tell you sooner how afraid I've been. You deserve a mother who is brave all the way to the end, but I'm so tired, sweetheart, tired in ways I can't explain. My body feels like borrowed time, and my thoughts feel like strangers." She paused, wiping at her eyes, then continued. "Please don't carry guilt for this. Don't let it settle into your heart like something that belongs there. I want you to live boldly, love recklessly, make bad decisions and forgive yourself for them. Don't let my ending define your beginning." She stopped writing after that. Her hand trembled too much. She folded the letter and slid it into an envelope, then placed it inside her nightstand drawer. It rested next to a faded photo of James holding baby Emily in his arms, both of them wrapped in the same knitted blanket Mary had made the year they bought the house. Lying in bed afterward, she stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet house and the distant sound of the wind pressing against the windows. If this was the end, she thought, at least she had said what mattered. Mary remained in her room most of the next day, the curtains half drawn, the light filtered and gray. Her body ached, her spirit ached more. She had barely spoken a word to Emily since returning from the hospital, except to say she was fine, which was, of course, a lie. The letter sat in the nightstand drawer, its presence like a whisper she couldn't quite silence. Later that afternoon, a soft knock came at the door. Mary didn't answer right away. She expected it to be Emily, gently pressing for a conversation she didn't want to have. But instead, a quiet voice said, "Mrs. Thompson? I hope it's okay. I asked the front desk nurse where you were." Mary sat up, startled. The voice was familiar in some ghost of the past kind of way. The door creaked open slightly, and a young woman in scrubs peeked inside. She was maybe in her mid-20s, blonde hair tied back neatly, eyes bright despite the obvious exhaustion of hospital work. "I'm sorry if this is weird," the woman said. "I'm Megan Lasky. I work here, and I used to be in your 10th grade English class." Mary blinked. The name stirred something, and then it clicked. "Megan," she murmured. "You had blue streaks in your hair and wrote poetry in the margins of your essays." Megan grinned. "Guilty." Mary offered the faintest smile. "You hated The Great Gatsby." "No, I hated being 15 and pretending I didn't care about anything," Megan corrected. "But you saw right through it." There was a pause, then Megan stepped inside, holding a paper cup of mint tea. "I saw your name on the patient chart last night, and I almost didn't say anything. But then I thought, maybe this is one of those moments that matters." Mary took the cup with a quiet thank you, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped. "I wanted to tell you something," Megan continued, her voice softer now. "Back in high school, I was in a bad place. My parents were getting divorced. I wasn't eating. I was cutting myself." Mary's gaze lifted sharply, pain flickering behind her eyes. "I didn't think anyone noticed," Megan said, "but you did. You pulled me aside after class one day and said, 'Your words are powerful, but your silence is louder. If you ever need someone to listen, I will.'" Mary's throat tightened. "You gave me a reason to ask for help," Megan said. "You saved me, and I don't think I ever told you that." The room was very quiet. Mary looked down into her tea, then back at Megan. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because," Megan said, stepping closer, "you look like someone who's forgotten how much she matters." That sentence struck something raw and hidden inside Mary, like a piano key pressed too hard, too fast. "I wrote a letter last night," Mary said, barely above a whisper. "A goodbye." Megan's eyes didn't flinch. She nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Chemo is hell, and grief. It stacks." Mary looked away, ashamed. "But," Megan added gently, "that woman who saw me at 15, she's still in there. Somewhere under all the pain and the pills and the baldness, she's still watching, still listening. And there are people out there, maybe even people you'll never meet, who need her voice." Mary's eyes filled with tears, and for once, she didn't try to stop them. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, no cinematic music swelled in the background, but something shifted, a breath, a pause, a thread pulled back into place. "I don't know if I can do this much longer," Mary admitted, her voice shaking. Megan smiled. "Then don't do it for long, just do today, then tomorrow, and we'll go from there." Mary reached out and took Megan's hand. "Thank you. Anytime," Megan said. "It's good to see you again, Mrs. Thompson." "It's good to be seen." When Megan left, Mary didn't open the drawer to remove the letter. Not yet, but that night, she wrote a new journal entry beneath the last one. "Maybe I'm still needed. Maybe I'm not done yet." A week had passed since Megan's visit, and though Mary's body was still weak, something inside her had begun to thaw. She no longer stared at the letter in her nightstand like it was a ticking clock. The days were still hard, filled with nausea, dizziness, and the relentless ache in her bones, but she found herself sitting up more, spending time by the window, writing again. Then, on a quiet Wednesday morning, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a card, a real letter, handwritten, stamped, folded carefully into a pale blue envelope with no return address. The handwriting was unfamiliar, delicate but firm. It was addressed simply, "Mary Thompson, for you." Emily found it in the mailbox and brought it in with the groceries. She handed it to her mother with a curious look but didn't ask questions. Mary sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope slowly. her fingers trembling slightly. She unfolded the paper and began to read. "Dear Mary, you don't know me. My name is Clara. I live in Colorado. I came across your video of you shaving your head, by accident, or maybe fate. A friend of a friend shared it on social media, and I watched it alone in my apartment sometime past midnight, when the world feels most cruel and quiet. I had just come back from the hospital that day. I'd found out my reconstruction surgery had failed. Again. Infection. Complications. I've already lost my left breast. Now I've lost the hope that I might look in the mirror and see someone who feels like me. I'm 37. I used to be married. I left him after he started flinching when he looked at me. I was ready to give up, Mary. But then I watched you. Silent, steady, strong. You cut your own hair like it was a ceremony. You didn't cry. You didn't flinch. You looked at the camera and said, 'This is what control looks like.' And I sobbed, not because I pitied you, because I saw myself in you, and for the first time I saw a future that wasn't just about enduring, it was about owning my story. I made an appointment the next day with a new oncologist. I started treatment again. I wrote a poem for the first time in 3 years. I even called my sister, who I hadn't spoken to since my diagnosis. You changed something in me. I just wanted you to know that I hope this letter finds you on a day when you need to remember what you're capable of. With love, Clara. Mary sat there long after finishing the letter, her eyes wet, the page trembling slightly in her hands. The kitchen around her was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of her own breath catching in her throat. She read it again, and again. Each time, the words sank deeper, unearthing something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just about finishing one more round of chemo or making it through another night of pain. It was about this: connection, impact, legacy. She folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. Emily, passing by the doorway, paused. "You okay?" Mary looked up, her voice hoarse but certain. I just remembered why I'm still here." The next morning, Mary sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea and Clara's letter resting beside a fresh notebook. The window let in slivers of soft golden light, and for the first time in weeks the silence around her didn't feel suffocating. It felt full, like it was waiting for her to fill it with something meaningful. She opened the notebook to the first page and began to write. "Dear Clara, I don't have the words to tell you what your letter meant to me, but I'm going to try. Thank you for your honesty, your bravery, and for letting me know that the fight I thought was mine alone was in fact shared. I read your words when I needed them most. You reminded me that the smallest action, something as simple as shaving my head, can ripple out farther than I'll ever see. And that maybe, just maybe, pain isn't the end of our story. Maybe it's where it begins to matter." She wrote slowly, carefully, letting the rhythm of the pen across the paper steady her breathing. When she finished the letter, she placed it in an envelope, added a soft pink stamp from the drawer, and labeled it only Clara, Colorado. She knew the address wasn't complete, but it didn't matter. Something told her it would find its way back. That afternoon, she logged onto her old Facebook account. The post of her head-shaving video had gathered more than 12,000 views by now. There were over 300 comments. Mary had only skimmed them before, overwhelmed by the sheer volume. Now she began to read carefully, each word, each name, each note of encouragement or solidarity. Many came from strangers: a woman in Florida who had just finished radiation, a teenage girl in Oregon who had shaved her head in solidarity with her mother, a man from Iowa who had lost his wife to breast cancer but found hope in Mary's quiet strength. Mary began to write again, one letter, then another. She addressed each envelope with as much care as if it were going to a lifelong friend. Some were responses, some were simple thank you notes, others were longer, stories, thoughts, prayers she hadn't known she still believed in. She didn't check for grammar. She didn't rewrite. She wrote like breathing. Over the course of that week, she mailed 12 letters. By the next week, 30. She bought a box of stationery from the little shop downtown, pale cream sheets with matching envelopes. She told the clerk she was just catching up on old friends, and for once, the lie didn't sting. It almost felt true. Emily noticed the change. "You're writing a lot," she said one evening, as Mary sealed yet another envelope. "I am," Mary replied simply. Emily tilted her head. "What are they about?" Mary looked up, smiling. "Hope, loss, strength, the things that live between those." She didn't explain further, and Emily didn't press. At night, when the house was quiet, Mary imagined her letters traveling. tucked in mailbags, shuffled through sorting centers, resting briefly in mailboxes before landing in hands that might be trembling like hers once did. She imagined someone sitting at a table, just like she had, holding a letter with their name on it, and feeling, for just a moment, less alone. That thought kept her going. On the inside cover of her notebook, she wrote the words, Project, 100 Letters of Hope. It wasn't a cure, it wasn't a miracle, but it was a purpose. And for Mary, in that fragile in-between space between illness and healing, that was enough. The air in the basement was cooler than the rest of the house, touched by the damp scent of old boxes, wood, and time. Dust floated in the single beam of light that streamed through the small rectangular window above the shelves. Mary hadn't been down there in months, maybe longer, but now, with the house officially listed for sale and medical bills stacking up like storm clouds, she had to start sorting through the remnants of a life she once built with James. Emily had offered to help, but Mary said no. Some memories, she decided, needed to be touched by only one pair of hands. She moved slowly between boxes marked Christmas, photos, books. Old coats hung from nails in the walls, lifeless, forgotten. She was reaching for a bin of blankets when she noticed the small wooden chest tucked beneath the stairs. It was James's old toolbox, except it wasn't where he usually kept it. Curious, she dragged it into the open and brushed off a thick layer of dust. The box creaked when she opened it. Inside, instead of tools, were letters, dozens of them, yellowed envelopes stacked carefully, all addressed in a familiar looping script that hit Mary like a punch to the chest. Margaret Halloway. Her mother. The return addresses were all from the same place, St. Augustine Care Center. Mary stared, not breathing. She reached for the first envelope. Postmarked 15 years ago. With trembling hands she opened it. Dear Mary, I know you're angry with me. I know you think I pushed you away, and maybe I did. Maybe I didn't know how to ask for help without feeling like I was taking something from you. But I miss you. I think of you every single day, and I'm scared. I wish I could hold your hand the way I used to when you were small. I wish I could go back and do so many things differently. The letter blurred before Mary could finish. Her vision clouded with tears, not soft, slow ones, but hot, furious ones. She reached for another letter, and another. Some were short, just a few lines. Others filled the page front and back. They all echoed the same things: remorse, longing, love. Mary stood up too quickly, the letters spilling out of the box onto the concrete floor. She couldn't breathe. All these years, she'd believed her mother had chosen distance, had chosen to die alone without saying goodbye. That belief had rooted itself so deeply inside her that she'd built parts of her personality around it. Her silence, her control, her quiet grief. But it wasn't true. Her mother had written, over and over again. And Mary had never known. Her hands shook as she crouched to pick up the letters. In the bottom of the box was a note written in James's handwriting, folded separately from the others. Mare, I didn't know what to do. You were 6 months pregnant. The doctor said your blood pressure was high. You were barely sleeping. And your mother was already in hospice. I made a choice. I'm not proud of it. I just didn't want to break you. I'm sorry. She read it twice. Then she sat down on the cold floor, surrounded by paper ghosts, and cried the kind of cry that shakes loose something inside you that's been locked away for years. James had loved her. She had never doubted that. But this was betrayal. Gentle, well-intentioned perhaps, but still a theft. He had taken her chance to forgive, her chance to say goodbye. The next morning, Mary stood at Agnes's front door with the box of letters clutched tightly in her hands. Her knuckles were white, her jaw set. The early morning air was crisp, biting at her cheeks, but she hardly noticed. She had barely slept. Agnes answered on the second knock, still in her robe, her silver hair pulled back loosely. Her eyes lit up when she saw Mary, until she saw the box. Agnes stepped back. Come in. Mary walked past her without a word and set the box on the kitchen table. The letters spilled slightly, their worn edges peeking through like old secrets finally breathing. You knew, Mary said, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. Agnes didn't pretend otherwise. She sat across from Mary and folded her hands, her gaze steady. I did. Mary stared at her, waiting, for denial, for excuse, for anything. I found out about the letters a few weeks after James first received them, Agnes continued quietly. He came to me. He didn't know what to do. You were fragile back then, Mare, pregnant, sleep-deprived. You were mourning your relationship with your mother long before she ever passed. I had a right to know, Mary said. Yes, Agnes said. You did. That admission caught Mary off guard. She blinked, her anger wobbling under the weight of unexpected honesty. You should have told me, Mary whispered, even years later. I've thought about it every day since, Agnes said, but by the time you buried James it felt too late. I told myself it was his decision to make, that it was his burden to carry, and I justified it with love. Mary looked down at the box. You all made choices for me. You didn't trust me to survive the truth. No, Agnes said softly. We didn't. Mary closed her eyes. Silence sat heavy between them. Finally, Agnes spoke again. Can I tell you something about your mother? Mary looked up, eyes red but steady. She was terrified, Agnes said. Not of dying, of being remembered only for her death. She told me once, if Mary sees me like this, all bent and broken, it'll be the last image she carries. I don't want to haunt her that way. Mary felt her throat tighten. I think, deep down, Agnes continued, she didn't want to protect herself. She wanted to protect you. Mary's fingers brushed the edge of a letter. She still deserved to be heard. Yes, Agnes said again. She did another long pause. Mary looked out the kitchen window. The maple tree in Agnes's yard had turned a deep, burning red. Autumn had crept in fully now, covering everything with color before winter would strip it all bare. I don't know how to forgive you, she said quietly. I don't need you to, Agnes replied. I only want you to live free of the weight of it. They sat there for a while, two women in a kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of things unspoken. Eventually, Mary reached into the box and pulled out one of the letters. She handed it across the table. Agnes hesitated, then took it. I don't know if I believe in God, Mary said, but I believe in mercy. Agnes nodded, her eyes glistening. I'd like to read them, Mary added. All of them, out loud. Maybe just to myself. Maybe not. I'll listen, Agnes said, if you want. Mary stood up, steadier than she'd felt in weeks. I'll let you know. She walked home with the box pressed close to her chest. She didn't feel healed. Not yet, but she felt honest. And for now, that was enough. That night, she opened the first letter again and read it out loud in the quiet of her living room. Her voice broke only once. At the end, she whispered to the darkness, I forgive you, Mom, and I'm sorry it took me this long to know you never left. A year later, the auditorium in Portland was filled to capacity, rows upon rows of chairs stretched across the carpeted floor, all facing the low stage at the front. The backdrop was simple, a lavender banner with bold white lettering, Voices of Strength, Survivors Speak. Sunlight filtered through high windows, catching in the silver hair of many women in the audience. Some wore headscarves, some had bald crowns proudly exposed, some clutched the hands of daughters, sisters, friends. Mary stood behind the podium, her fingers lightly resting on the edge of the microphone stand. She was thinner now, but not frail. Her hair had started to return in soft silver tufts, and her eyes, though older, held a steady fire. She wore a dark green dress and a simple silver necklace. Her only note card was tucked into her jacket pocket, untouched. She didn't need it. I was diagnosed with breast cancer 14 months ago, she began, her voice clear and calm. And for a while I thought that diagnosis was the end of my story. There was a soft murmur of recognition from the audience. Heads nodded. I thought it meant I would shrink, that I would fade, that I would become less of myself. She paused, letting the silence settle. But I was wrong. The room leaned in. I lost things, yes. My hair, my strength, my sense of control. I even lost trust in people I loved, in my own body, in time. Another pause. But I found something else, something I never expected. I found letters from strangers. I found community. I found women who taught me that survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it looks like reading a letter at 2 a.m. and realizing you're not alone in your pain. Her eyes scanned the crowd. And sometimes survival looks like starting over. From the back of the auditorium, a figure stood. Mary's breath caught in her throat. It was Clara. She was taller than Mary had imagined. She wore a soft blue dress that hugged a very pregnant belly. Her hair was short and dark, her eyes bright and shining. She didn't say a word. She just smiled and pressed a hand gently over her heart. Mary froze for a moment. Then something inside her shifted, melted, opened. She stepped away from the podium, walked down the stairs into the audience, ignoring the surprised looks around her. When she reached Clara, neither spoke. Mary opened her arms, and Clara fell into them. The applause began softly, then grew. They stood there, two women who had never met but who had saved each other in invisible ways. One scarred, one expecting, both alive. Clara pulled back, her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't think I'd make it," she whispered. Mary smiled. "You did. I wanted to meet you before the baby comes," Clara said, "and to tell you in person, I'm naming her Mary." Mary's face crumpled, and she pulled Clara back into a tight embrace. All around them, the room stood and clapped. Somewhere in the distance a camera clicked, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy holding on, not to the moment, but to everything it meant. A month passed. The air had grown colder. The trees, once brilliant with reds and golds, now stood bare, their branches clawing at the sky. Mary found herself reaching for heavier sweaters and drinking more tea. The quiet around the house no longer felt like an enemy. It had become something else, something sacred. The letter came on a Tuesday. It arrived in a plain white envelope with her name written in thick, careful handwriting. There was no return address, but the moment she touched it, Mary knew. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Dear Mary, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. I hope you'll forgive me for writing something so heavy, but I needed to leave this in the world, even if I couldn't stay. The delivery was harder than we expected. I held her, just for a moment, just long enough to tell her that her name came from someone brave, someone who gave me a second chance when I didn't think I deserved one. I wanted you to know that I was at peace. Because of you. You showed me what courage looks like in silence. You reminded me that survival isn't always measured in years, but in moments. I got to have mine, those weeks of hope, of laughter, of love, because you stood up when I couldn't. So now I'm passing it on. I want you to keep writing. Not just your story. Write hers, write mine, write for every woman who never got to say goodbye. Write until we are no longer invisible. Thank you for seeing me. With all my love." Clara. Mary read it once. Then again. The third time the words blurred into waves. She pressed the letter to her chest, feeling the weight of it. Not just the paper, but the legacy, the invitation, the unbearable beauty of a life interrupted. That night she didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at her desk and opened a new notebook. On the first page she wrote, "To Clara, to Mary, to the women who fought, and to the ones still fighting, this is for you." She wrote until her fingers ached, until dawn crept up behind her curtains and painted the room in gold. Not out of grief, out of promise. The library smelled like old books and polished wood. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, warming the tops of the shelves and casting long golden shadows across the carpet. The community room was filled to the edges. Neighbors, nurses, strangers, survivors. Folding chairs packed closely together, rows and rows of expectant faces. A year had passed since Clara's last letter. 12 months of writing, editing, healing, and now Mary stood behind a podium once more, but this time, not as a patient, not even as a survivor, as an author. The banner above her read, "Letters from the Survivors, a Living Testament." Below it, stacked neatly on a table, were the first printed copies of her book. Cream-colored covers with elegant navy blue lettering and a small feather embossed in gold in the corner. Emily stood to the side, arms crossed, smiling softly. Her eyes shimmered as she caught her mother's gaze. Mary adjusted the microphone and looked out at the crowd. Her hair had grown in fully now, short, silver, and soft. Her shoulders were straighter. Her voice, when she began, was calm and full. "Thank you for being here," she said. "This isn't just a book launch, this is a continuation." She lifted a copy from the table and opened it. There are 100 letters in this book, each one written to a real person. Some I've met, some I never will, some are gone, some are sitting in this very room. She paused. "Clara isn't here today," she added gently, "but her story is." Mary flipped through the pages until she landed on one marked with a pale ribbon. "I'd like to read one of the letters," she said. "It's not mine. It's one Clara sent me in her final weeks. I included it exactly as it was written." She took a breath. "Dear Mary, I imagine you, years from now, sitting by a window with tea and paper, still writing, still surviving. Maybe your hair is long again. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're unsure. But please, keep going, because someone out there hasn't heard your voice yet, and they need to. Tell them about the fall air in Maine. Tell them about shaving your head and not feeling shame. Tell them how grief doesn't end, but it changes shape. Tell them you once thought you'd write a goodbye letter, and now you're writing beginnings. You changed me. So change someone else. With love." Clara. Mary looked up from the page. Many in the audience were quietly wiping their eyes. She closed the book. "I thought cancer would take everything from me," she said. "And it did take a lot, but it also gave me something I never expected. the courage to speak when I felt voiceless, and the responsibility to speak for others who no longer can. She smiled gently. So today isn't about endings, it's about beginnings, yours, mine, and theirs. As applause rose around her, Mary stepped down from the podium. People came to her with books to sign, hands to hold, stories to share. She listened to every one. Later, after the last book was signed and the chairs were being folded away, Mary sat by the window near the back of the room, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. Emily joined her. "You did it," Emily whispered. Mary nodded. "We did. I think Dad would be proud," Emily added. Mary's eyes softened. "I think Clara would be too." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun begin to dip behind the maple trees outside. Then Mary pulled a blank envelope from her purse and a fresh sheet of stationery. She opened her pen. Emily tilted her head. "Writing another one?" Mary smiled. "Always." And with steady hands she began, "Dear someone who's still afraid, I don't know your name. I don't know your diagnosis. I don't know how many nights you've spent awake, wondering if tomorrow is a gift or a curse. But I do know this, you are not alone. Sometimes the letters we never expect are the ones that save us." Mary's story wasn't just about illness. It was about choosing to live out loud, to love bravely, and to speak when silence felt safer. Some people leave behind buildings, awards, or legacies written in stone. But Mary? She left behind words, living words, that healed, that connected, that carried others forward when they couldn't walk alone. And maybe that's what we're all here to do. What about you? If you could write one letter to someone who's struggling today, what would you say? Tell us in the comments below. You never know who needs to hear your words. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story that just might change a life.